All Saints is home to a number of brilliant initiatives which explore connections between faith and art. And I'm excited to talk to artist Anne Grebby about our latest installation here. So on Sunday we had our patronal festival here at All Saints, and as part of those celebrations we had an amazing launch in the evening with our One Bread Cafe and also of the Reading Between the Lines art installation, didn't we, Anne?
We did indeed, and it was a fantastic experience. I think certainly it was for me, and I think for quite a lot of people, because the responses to the paintings were extremely enthusiastic and extremely serious at the same time. And previous exhibitions or exhibition openings that I've been at, then there hasn't been the relationship between the context and the work. In this case, I think what happened in this event was that people saw the significance of the narrative, which is the narrative of Jesus's journey to his death and to his ascension, step by step, as he encounters people on the route of the cross. I think what did happen was that the atmosphere of the church and the beauty of this building enclosed not just the work and framed not just the work, but the people. So that was what was so wonderful for me. It was as if there was a sense of belonging, and not belonging like ownership of a place, but being part of. And I felt that the people that came responded in that way. It wasn't just everybody talking to each other and sipping a Prosecco. It was actually people talking and looking and responding.
And there was a real attentiveness and a willingness to be opened up to something new and to have an encounter through art with perhaps something that God is trying to say to us. And today we're going to take a look at some of the paintings and explore them together, aren't we? So here we are in front of a wonderful painting entitled Reading Between the Lines, which is in fact the title for the whole exhibition. So Anne, would you like to explain a little bit about that title and what that means for this particular piece?
Yes, I think the words are so significant because the whole experience of reading is usually that we concentrate on the lines. In this case, I'm saying what's underneath, and what's underneath exists in every viewer's mind. So the whole idea of reading between the lines is inclusive. It embraces the viewer. It brings them into the painting.
And what's amazing about so much of your work is it focuses on the book, on text, but it's not just a kind of dead text. It sort of erupts out of the surface and also dissolves into images and breaks apart and reconnects. So there's a lot of energy, there's so much happening. Anything else that you'd like to explore with this piece?
Well, it's a continuation of your statement that basically there is a sense of life and death enclosed in this idea of the lines, because we have the whole of the text is eroding. It's also eroded by light falling onto the book. But as the text and the words erode, my thoughts were that they poured from the book, so they come out of the book. This also links with something I said earlier, which is that it's happening in your mind. So we have this dust, and the dust, of course, is the dust of human beings. It's the dust of words, and it's turning into something which is quite magical to my mind. So it becomes a kind of cloud, but it also forms eventually this sign of the cross, which is, after all, two lines crossing.
And you spoke a bit at the opening about how your art often explores what seem to be contradictory themes of loss and dislocation, but also themes of light and life and revelation. I think that comes together amazingly in this piece. I often think of all of the eyes here, the figures, which are fragmented and broken apart, which says something very profound about our humanity. But actually dotted through this, we have an image of Jesus' face with his eyes closed. And they might be eyes closed in death, or they might be eyes closed in contemplation and prayer. And I love your artwork because it doesn't let us decide on one thing or the other. It always opens us up to contemplate, to think, to expand our vision and our understanding, which of course is what faith's all about as well, not closing down those things, but opening them out. As the book opens, so our soul also opens to the revelation that God gives us.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely on hitting the spot. But just to add to it, each of these fragments of faces are taken from the characters that we meet on Jesus, or who meet Jesus on the way to the cross. So the mother, Judas, various people that also inhabit the paintings around us and the rest of the exhibition. And each of these eyes is weeping, so there's a tear. And for me it was quite important because this is very dry. It looks as if it's a scroll. It's supposed to be a scroll with fragments on it. The fragments themselves are all lines because they're cut away from each other. So these people are separated, they're isolated, and yet they form one surface. And the other important thing, and this is again dealing with the idea of a line, is that the eyes never meet. Nobody's eyes meet anybody's. It deals with our separation, our aloneness, our existence alone. And in this way, I wanted to talk about how that we are just alone in God. And that's an important factor in it. But at the same time, we're en masse in God. So it's a very interesting dynamic there.
So we're standing before what is actually one of my favourite pieces in this exhibition, Judas Weeps, Mary Weeps. Anne, would you like to say a little bit about this piece?
Well, this is a portrait of grief, but it's not the same grief. Interestingly enough, the two faces came from one face, and the one face was that of Mary, which I took from an anonymous icon, Mary and Jesus enshrouded. This is Jesus enshrouded. But what happened was that I wanted to make the point that grief is all embracing, and it's the same grief, whatever the cause, because we have grief which here comes from guilt, and we have grief which comes from out and out mother's love. And the outcome, the look in the eyes and the expression in the eyes is extremely similar. It's extremely close. But hidden behind the face and behind the eyes is an intensity of feeling which is actually coming from a very different source and will turn within each of these individuals into something within the narrative that has a very different outcome.
And it's really interesting here, Anne, isn't it? Because if you look at Mary's face and Jesus's face, their grief seems to speak about relationship, about a closeness that is there. Yes, there is loss, but it's also about relationship. Whereas with Judas's face, there's an absence that opens up into the darkness, which Judas stares into with that sort of absence in his eyes as well. So again, we've got those sort of contradictions and tensions that your art often plays with, about where does grief lead us. It can be about relationship, about tenderness, but it also might be about loss and absence and betrayal. And you hold those things wonderfully together because they're both on the pages of this book. They're both held there and tell us something about who we are at the deepest level of ourselves and also what God might be saying to us.
I think that the idea of the pages is also very important because this is about time, and many of the paintings have open books. We've just seen the Reading Between the Lines book, which is the book of the Word of God, and the idea for me is that the page turns, and as the page turns, something's revealed. So again, beneath the face is another page, there's another episode. I think it's an interesting point you made about the Judas facing the blackness. He's on the edge of the book, and here's this very poignant coming together, as you said, of relationship. I think one perhaps final point I'd like to make is that of the gutter of the book. And for me, it's always an important binding. The gutter is actually something which is shared by both. It holds the images together, and it's usually blood. So we have this idea of these two characters who are human. They're human beings, and they contain blood themselves, and here they are, in a way, sharing a moment which is tied together by the blood of Christ.
So, Anne, the idea of the installation began with Jesus' journey towards the cross, but as things progressed, you went beyond that, and here we stand before one of the larger pieces that you have created, which is the resurrection. What might you have to say about this?
Well, this is a very simplified form, this geometric form, which represents the idea of the tomb and entombment. It's heavy, but it's white, and the white has a sort of ethereal quality. And so as we read this painting, I think we're taken in with this very sharp line, which makes this point, this geometric corner. So we're taken into the painting, onto a strong form. Our eyes travel across the top of the tomb, and we find ourselves being directed by the clouds across to the women. And these are the women coming to dress the body of Jesus in the morning. And for me, I loved this idea that as one moves into the painting, one actually arrives at this almost ceremonial movement towards the tomb. And of course, we know that they are going to find the tomb empty, and they don't. They don't know this. So I loved the innocence of these women. And I would emphasize the fact that the white actually is there as a kind of arrow directing us around the painting. It ends with this sort of river of fabric, but it's also hinting at the shroud which they will find is left in the tomb.
I love as well the journey in this painting. There's a real movement that happens as we're viewing it, and you have the three crosses in the background almost receding from view, and I suppose that's the vision of sort of suffering and death that Christ has walked towards. But now that moves away as the women come forward, expecting to experience something of loss and grief and death. But the landscape has changed entirely. This feels so different to your usual landscape. And as they journey, they're drawn forward by this mysterious shadow of a figure, which speaks to us something about resurrection and hope and life beyond. So they're journeying from this sort of sense of loss and death and suffering towards something new and unexpected and life-giving, the resurrection promise of Jesus, perhaps.
Yeah, and this shadow is also something which we can identify with. So it could be us. It actually was me, because I used a shadow of myself, thinking I'm including the painter here, but I didn't include it to be me. I included it to be the viewer. So we have the idea that we're present in the painting. We could also say there's enough ambiguity in the figure to be the angel waiting the other side of the tomb, or Jesus himself waiting, watching, knowing that they're approaching.
And I love the way even the tomb here, the sort of geometric form of it, should be something that encloses the human body in death. But actually, it's opening out, the cloud movement there. There's something transcendent and ethereal that takes us beyond that sense of enclosure and death and endings, which they're expecting, to actually encountering something that takes them beyond. And this movement, always in Christian faith, which opens us out to something new and unexpected, something transcendent and beautiful, even in those dark places of death and despair and loss. Can you say something about the text here that seems to appear out of the earth itself?
Yes, we come back to the initial idea of reading between the lines. This is a very linear painting altogether. The shadows of the women become lines, the crosses are lines, the actual landscape is extremely geometric and linear. And also we have some kind of transparency. So the heaviness of the tomb is lightened by the fact that it could be that it's transparent. We can see lines of writing beneath it. And then we have this extraordinary sense of text and perhaps stones, perhaps earth, gravel, whatever it might be, coming out and reaching up towards the women. The words themselves are repeated over and over again, and I use this as a technical device a lot in paintings, because I really love the idea of erasure, which is actually accumulative. So you accumulate text, and even if it's the same text, the erasure turns it into something that's solid. It makes it only just identifiable. And that was important to me, that in actual fact it was a mysterious thing. And the text here actually says matter contained and released. And I think you could align that with the idea of the body dying and the body being released from life and the body travelling beyond life.
Anne's Reading Between the Lines art installation will continue from Monday the 8th of November all the way till the end of the month, and you can receive a special tour that Anne will be giving on Tuesday afternoons from 2 o'clock, which you can book or simply turn up to. There's so much to explore here, and you are all very welcome.